From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Digital Banter. I have some sad news to share. Moving forward, Zach is no longer going to be hosting on the podcast with me. Zach has moved on. Hopefully we'll have him back. We love him to death. I'm sure he'll be a guest in the future, but lucky for you guys, you got a new co-host, somebody who's familiar that hopefully you guys who have listened before remember and enjoyed the contribution that he's brought to the table. So I certainly have, and that's why hosting with me moving forward is going to be our CEO, Andy.
Nice lead up there, James. The anticipation probably killed everybody, but it's good to be here and happy to contribute going forward.
Topic for today is kind of an interesting one that I've certainly thought a lot about, working in the B2B space. One of the things that as a customer, and we use a lot of different SaaS products as an agency, one of the things that I see as a customer is brands that really struggle to build trust. Trust is a huge proponent of marketing, being a big proponent of brand demand. You really have to trust a brand in order to work with them. And the big thing that has really shifted over the course of, honestly, like the last couple of years, I'm sure it's been something that's been in the back of people's minds for a while now, is the fact that brands put out a lot of content, and I think customers are getting more savvy as far as whether or not that content is biased. So today, the purpose of our conversation is to go through and talk about how brands can effectively build trust within their marketing strategies and use that trust to get new customers. And hopefully we can walk you through some helpful tips on things to avoid. Let's just say some of the, we can see through the silver lining of some marketing activities that people are doing today, and talk about how you can reposition that to be a way that is more, unbiased and more trusting.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, building trust is going to equal easier sales. Building partnerships and relationships up front, whether they close tomorrow or close in 6 months, they just result in better business and better business efforts, whether it be marketing, sales, product, customer success. Trust lies both at the individual level and the brand level. And that's what's going to make a difference as far as converting somebody into a customer and keeping them as a customer to keep that LTV going and reduce that churn.
So let's start by jumping into, I always like to create a little bit of conflict in these episodes. Let's jump into some of the things that we see brands doing right now that are that are not very trustworthy, I guess you could say, or leads to a feeling of, hey, I don't trust that brand, maybe I'm going to look for an alternative solution. So Andy, why don't you walk through some of what the pet peeves that you see are, and then I'll walk through some that I see and take it from there.
Well, I think the upfront thing is how genuine is the content and messaging you're putting forth, especially on the brand side of things, right? Are you actually giving information to help me, or are you just trying to sell me? Look, at the end of the day, yeah, every brand wants to create new customers and pipeline, but the way in which you go about that is going to make or break whether that actually happens. So providing that upfront value, that education, things that James and Zach and everybody else in the demand gen space kind of preach on an everyday basis hold true. But also, does the brand and ultimately the individual, whether that's the evangelist or the salesperson reaching out to you, have your back, right? How trustworthy are they to ultimately solving my problem, I should say, or are they just there to, close the deal and move on? That's what's creating trust, that partnership versus vendorship mentality up front. And that not only closes the deal, but like I said before, it either makes or breaks the longevity of your relationship with that brand. go beyond the B2B side of things for a second. Look at every macro element out there. And things that create distrust are exactly what I said, but also the product, shoddy products that don't live up to what they say they're going to do, people that don't live up to what they say they're going to do. Whether it's politics, religion, all those things that you don't want to talk about in work or on any podcast, which we're not going to talk about here, they all roll up to creating distrust, mistrust, or ultimately trust. And those are the things that create opportunities or kill opportunities for a brand to move forward and grow.
Yeah. I mean, you certainly nailed it on the head. I think when I think of especially digital marketing, the core focus is like, what are brands putting on their website? Like I know we had an episode a while back of like the purpose of a homepage and kind of how the content on your website is changing. And I think that this is where, I think a lot of the trust is built off of the website in marketing activity, through what you're putting out on social, advertising, part of communities. We'll kind of dive into each of those a bit later, but it really is split between like off website activity and on website activity. And I think where I see a lot of distrust is like people trying to promote like thought leadership and kind of like some of the more fuzzy stuff that I feel like should be happening offsite on their website. And the reason I say that is when I go to a brand's website, people always say like your website is now your storefront. And as part of your storefront, like you're ready to purchase, you're looking for information that's going to help you purchase. You're not looking for industry level advice and thought leadership. Because at that point, when you go to that storefront, you know that the information that you're getting is completely biased. I know you've all seen like the sales comparison pages where they're like, hey, this is us and this is how we stack up against all of your competitors. I would like to show you to show me one example where somebody did that and they don't stack up against their competitors in a positive position, right? When you're going and reading their blog, bias. When you're going and like engaging with any sort of, let's call it top middle of funnel content, it is going to be biased because it's coming directly from the brand. It'd be like walking into a sporting goods store, say like Dick's Sporting Goods, and them not trying, like just talking about like sports in general, and you use them as like a trusted authority. I don't see it there, right? They're not going to say, like, nobody's going to come and say like, hey, we have Dick's Sporting Goods, like we have a worse product selection and higher prices than Academy Sports. Like that's not what you're going to get out of them, right? And it's the same with B2B marketing. And that's where it kind of goes into this larger transition of people don't trust brands as much, but people do trust people. And I think that part of marketing strategies now is about how do you balance putting out information via people versus the brand. And that is a difficult balance that I think people are trying to figure out right now.
Well, I think it also goes to the extent of how do you harness the power of your customers, and prospects, to alleviate that mistrust of content being put out by the brand. A great example of that is just reviews and testimonials. Look, we have reviews and testimonials on our site, don't get me wrong, but there's plenty of brands out there that harp and push it so heavily, and you use those comparison charts as an example there. That data and the comparisons and the features are put together by the brand's website, like the marketing team. It could be legit, but at the end of the day, it's bias. You're right. It's bias. So it comes back to where else can I get my information to create trust around whether this brand is legitimate or not in what they say they do, what they actually do, and whether they can solve my problem effectively. A great example of this is just the other week, I had a situation at our house where I had to call up a plumber and ultimately a septic company to come out and fix a problem that cropped up overnight, literally. And I'm looking at websites, obviously at 10 o'clock at night, trying to get somebody on the phone, see if they can come out and fix my problem in the morning. everybody's got reviews, everybody's got testimonials. I don't really care about what they say on their site. I care about what they do and whether they look professional. So a shoddy website versus one that actually looks professional is number one. And then going offsite, looking at the third-party reviews on, Google, Yelp, seeing out how these brands actually solved other customers' problems that are similar to mine. Were they on time? Did they return the calls? Price-wise, were they somewhat, in my ballpark, not going to be outrageous? Granted, it was an emergency situation, so I knew that coming into it. But all of that information rounds out to create trust or distrust up front. And the same thing can be said for B2B, right? Swap out Google and Yelp for G2, for Capterra, for any other review site out there where you are hopefully getting a third-party, unbiased reaction and review of the product that you're actually looking at. Same thing can be said about all of the communities that you belong to. How many Slack channels do you and I belong to, James, where people are always asking for recommendations, ideas, and things like that? And we're obviously soliciting and giving feedback and ideas to help suit those. But they're going to trust more about those networks and communities than anything that a brand's going to put out there, because people create trust. Brands, they're just an entity that is out there. There's no trust being put behind it because there's a very minimal relationship being built with that brand at the end of the day. It's about people.
Yeah, and that's right. I think on the brand side, it's more about legitimacy rather than, because there's, having I'll use this I always used to like to use this example for software products. Like your website, your web experience is a direct reflection of your product. So to an extent, like you do need to have a good experience. Your website needs to be intuitive. It needs to have the information available that somebody needs to make a purchasing decision. But yeah, to your point, the question for you, SaaS case studies, we always joke about this, saving time and money. Every single Asana saves time and money. Every tool saves time and money. That's the reason that software exists almost. But there are case studies where they try to assign assign dollar amounts to the time saved, and all these case studies look exactly the same. And I don't see them being a great selling point when you can just go to somebody who's used the software before and say, hey, was this good or not? That's, and I think there's just way better places to get your information out than, the marketing materials that's provided to you by sales reps or a website or behind a gated form,
Right. So I think the other thing too, just to add on top of this, is I mentioned about people versus brand. And the intersection between those is trust is built by your ability to listen, react, and ultimately act, right? How many prospect and just kind of sales calls have we been on where, we're walking into a conversation with somebody that we haven't talked to before, or we've talked to once, and they're elaborating on a lack of trust that they had with their former agency or internal stakeholders who were managing, their paid media on the brand's behalf. Because the trust was built not just because of performance concerns, but also because of those intangibles, those qualitative intangibles of listening, being proactive, and ultimately reacting to the conditions of the market, the conditions of the audience, using the data at their disposal to move and react and proactively act. It all comes back to listening, and that betrayal of trust starts at the beginning of whether you listen or not.
Yeah, I think it continues. Again, use software as the example. I think what isn't sold enough is what the ongoing support looks like after the fact. Because that's probably my biggest concern and problem with every poor software situation that I've ever been part of is I really want to use this software. It can help me, but I don't know how to use it. It's got some technical glitch or and it's okay. Especially in startups, that stuff is going to happen, but it's how do you resolve it? I feel like we deal with this a lot with our reporting tools, and the one that we work with right now has pretty good customer service. You can actually get in contact with somebody who's going to help you out versus, I'll use the Google Ads example here too, not necessarily a SaaS product, but like 5 years ago, I used to be able to call them up on the phone and say, hey, like this ad is disapproved and it's clearly should be approved. Can you put it through the system? Boom, 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 boom. It would go through the system. Now I have to go through, I don't even, you have to go through a chat. It again sends you to a person who doesn't work for Google and then go through 8 people until you find someone who can actually, it's just like, and that's like really a really poor brand experience. I think that that's also a big reason why a lot of brands, media agencies are moving away from Google and moving towards other activities.
It also goes to the next level of trust being based off of instinct or gut feeling. It's not like this, checklist of things of, oh yeah, trust means this, this, and this. Like, no, it's an inherent feeling that you get. It's a feeling that you get when you visit a website. It's a feeling you get when somebody sends a connection request on LinkedIn. You're automatically going to get pitch slapped with that next email that comes through. And it just is that intangible, inherent feeling that you have inside of you of whether you're going to be open to considering trusting this entity, whether it be brand or individual reaching out to you or not. And if it's starting off on the not side of things, around mistrust and distrust because of how you have been approached or what you've seen in the past, the brand or the individual reaching out and creating that connection has a higher hill to climb than what they even realized. So that's why it's so important that to have your brand collateral and your individual collateral up to snuff. Things we're talking about are an updated looking website. It doesn't have to be crazily designed, but really transparent, open. What do you do? And just having a sleek looking, good feeling, trustworthy feeling design, not some Wix site that you just slam together, things like that. And obviously the reviews, those third-party aspects of things. Now, by no means, and I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, James, I don't think we're advocating for Gartner reports, Forrester reports, or anything like that, because personally, I think you're pissing away money by investing in those most of the time. We're talking about very different third-party content.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, there are a lot of third parties that are pay to play that everybody knows are like pay to play. I mean, I almost equivalent that to like, there's a lot of like spammy Amazon reviews out there. Like how many times you see a product on being advertised on Facebook and then it has like 1,000 reviews and they're like clearly all fake. It's funny because like Amazon takes pride in how they like verify their reviews, but everybody's got a loop to the system, but it's like, it's very clear when it's a trustworthy source versus a non-trustworthy source. And I could tell you if it's being promoted in ads, it's probably not a trustworthy source. It was probably a paid award. I mean, us as a media agency, like if we want to get any award, almost, you have to like pay $6,000 to be part of the thing, and then it really is about like who paid the most to get that award. It's a lot, and that's you got to just see through that. I think people do now, and that's what we're talking about here.
It's the authentic content that makes the difference. Authentic things that allude to you having somebody's back, not breaking promises, having that historical context and experience of being a strong partner. That's what makes trust. That's what creates trust.
So let's kind of jump into some of the more specifics on, I'll say like tactical things that you can do to add trust to your marketing strategy and kind of build it in the correct way rather than some of the surface level things that we were just talking about. So Andy, when we were kind of planning for this, one of the things that you initially talked quite a bit about is bringing empathy into the sales process. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of the effective way to bring that into an existing sales process?
Yeah, I think at its core, it's realizing that the person that you are trying to sell has a problem and being empathetic towards that challenge that they're trying to solve for. And that's especially true at this given moment, given economic and market conditions. I have a problem that I'm trying to solve by looking at your software or, professional services or whatever the case may be. And I have a very deep rooted problem that I'm trying to solve for. It's not some surface level thing where I'm just, it might be where I'm tasked with going forward and finding the next, reporting or project management tool, but I have a vested interest here, right? As far as solving this problem, because it's something that's going to affect me deeply. And this goes beyond B2B, obviously, but you create empathy in that sales process by reaching out and creating those conversational points, whether it be on the content side of things or the conversational side of things, with the understanding that there's another human being on that side of the phone, of the video camera, or on that other side of the ad and email. And creating that personal connection at scale, if we want to call it such, makes a difference to creating the trust that you need to make your sales easier. And this goes beyond, obviously, all of that too, when you think about the types of content that need to be considered. Forget gate versus ungate for a second. Like that's let's not beat that horse to death necessarily, but think about the transparency that you have in pricing, for an example there, but also the references that you might have at your disposal to share with that prospective customer. People that are going to speak well on your behalf because they've gone through similar challenges, gone through the journey, and have been better for it by working with your brand. I hate people that reach out to me and I ask, okay, can you give me some references? And they give me some generalized anonymous bullshit testimonial. And that's not what I'm asking for. I want to talk to a real human being. Like, what are you hiding? Right? That's a big thing of mine. And I think it's a big thing for any buyer is when you're not willing to give information, whether it's a reference, whether it's a product demo that is not requiring you to jump on a call with sales. It comes back to the question of what are you hiding? And if that question gets asked, there's an inherent mistrust already based into the relationship. And again, creating a higher hill and mountain that the brand has to climb in sealing the deal and actually helping impact everyone's life better.
Yeah, I mean, we had I won't drop names here, but we had a product recently that we were looking at that just offered, say, like, hey, we have other agencies using it. Do you want to talk to one of them? And I thought it was a nice thing because, I mean, we ended up having that conversation and it was a very open and honest conversation around how their experience went. And I do think that built a lot of trust for me, for the product. And, I was able to talk to somebody who had a relatable experience. We talked about pricing. We talked about how they, transition those costs to their clients. We were able to have like a really good business conversation. Now, I think the struggle that a lot of brands may have is that sometimes it's not easy to get people to have those conversations because you're like putting stress on somebody else who has it like here, go sell on my behalf. I don't know. It's kind of you got to have good people to do that,
I don't know if it's even good people. I think it's obviously you're putting a lot of trust in those individuals that are speaking on your behalf, but it's also coming back to whether you create a great relationship up front. There's going to be people, whether they are wanting to speak on a phone call or a video call to a prospective customer or are just social selling on your behalf through the communities that they belong to. And when they recommend you, like it's always going to exist. You're going to have loyalists, you're going to have advocates, and you're going to have ambassadors out there. It's the people that are comfortable acting in certain ways that are going to make the difference. So when I get asked, hey, do you have a couple references? I have people and former clients and existing clients that I've already created great relationships with that I've already asked, hey, if this comes up, would you mind being a reference that somebody can reach out to? And when that happens, I literally just pick up my phone and text them and say, hey, just a heads up, I got somebody that's asking for references. You still cool if I share your name? I get a text back in 5 minutes saying, yeah, obviously, no problem. And there we go. Because the relationships that we build up front, the partnerships that you create, and the trust that you create with those customers, like you're going to have more people willing to speak on your behalf when you create great trust up front.
For sure. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about how we can integrate this into, I'll say, like some of the core pieces of most marketing strategies. So we have community and social, content strategy, paid media, and we'll go through some internal stuff too. So I'm going to jump in and talk about community and social a bit, because this is where I think the biggest transition has happened. I mean, as a marketing team, I will say that when we say community, we're talking about a lot of the private communities that are out there. And community isn't necessarily meaning like a Facebook group, a LinkedIn group. Those are great opportunities, but this also includes like other places where people gather. Like, I think that YouTube channels like YouTubers also like create communities around themselves. There are like social influencers. Like, I consider that community because there are a lot of people who are gathering together, following an individual. So I know, if there are, again, I'm part of this community too, so maybe this is a bad example, but there's the Exit 5 community, Dave Gerhardt. Dave Gerhardt puts out a lot of content on LinkedIn, and he gets a ton of comments, right? And I kind of see the comments on his posts in a similar way that I would see the comments or the conversations within his community, because you do have a gathering of, I'll say, like-minded or, people who are aligned to the same thing, having conversations, whether it's in the comments of posts, in the comments of YouTube videos, comments on a podcast, whatever it is. It's an opportunity to have open and real conversations. And this is where there's a lot of brands who are not engaging with this at this point. They're not, their team members are not part of these communities. They're not engaging and learning from customers. They're just kind of doing it the old school way of, reaching out and doing a survey rather than focusing on some of the qualitative information that comes out of these groups. And this is also where, from a marketing strategy perspective, there's a shift between, hey, we should be blasting out content on our company LinkedIn page versus, hey, let's have our CEO be a thought leader in the space and share some of the things that they talk about. And the big thing here is like that strategy has to come from the top. And this is where, again, about building trust, authenticity is a big part of it. And that's why, for example, us Dragon 360, like Andy does a lot of thought leadership based content that comes from him. It is not an intern researching things and posting on his behalf, or an assistant or whatever it is, because again, people can see right through that. And that type of leadership is something that trickles down throughout the organization. And I think that this is where a lot of marketing teams, one, aren't even getting involved in communities. Two, they really struggle to get leadership involved in thought leadership. And when they do that, it either comes out as non-authentic because it's coming from the marketing team, or it's coming from people who just don't have that kind of clout yet, I guess. And I say yet because I think everybody can earn their way there. But this is where marketing teams should be gathering insights from these communities that then they're able to take to other activities. Again, I think that especially in the SaaS startup space, it's like a no-brainer place to start.
Yeah, you talk about authenticity. I think authenticity spans externally and internally as well. So you mentioned about CEOs such as myself putting out content and things like that. I mean, to an extent, that's kind of expected. But on the same side of that token, if you have more ambassadors of your brand that work at your brand spreading content that is not biased because, look, I'm the CEO, I have to do that, I should be doing it, let's put it that way. It's less biased when you have, your other team members or members of the organization spanning throughout the hierarchy and silos that may exist from a departmental perspective, putting out similar thoughts, similar advice, similar points of view that all boils up to the same kind of overarching umbrella that you as the brand believe in and want to be pushing forward as far as what you're selling. When you have that full exposure of team members that are outside of leadership, there is more authenticity because you don't feel like you're being gamed or, sold on something that is a pipe dream at the end of the day. And that's huge. That's important, because I think brands need to consider that even more when they look at who is out there speaking on their behalf beyond just the brand itself and beyond just leadership.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of everybody beating the same drum within an organization. I think that, again, though, you have to make that authentic. It's, I'm not saying like go through and mandate everybody post to LinkedIn and retweet our CEO, because then it becomes fake. And the other thing too is like you do have to balance like personal brand versus company brand. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. I can't tell you how many people I've seen that like jump from like sales organization from SaaS startup space, jump from one company to another. It happens all the time. They're headhunting left and right. And you see, they're talking about this brand one day, they're talking about that brand the next day. And it's just like, okay, like you're a salesperson. This is great. So I don't think, and honestly, that's something that I don't think a lot of brands have really figured out just yet, is like the appropriate way to balance personal, professional, call it personal/professional for a lot of the LinkedIn content that's out there. But certainly, I think we're at a point where like leadership should be involved, because again, I also think that leadership should be vested in the company, right? And I feel like if they're not, it kind of, I think that's an example that shows like mistrust.
I mean, you think back a couple of years when employee advocacy tools like GaggleAmp and something else came out.
There's still a bunch.
Right, there's still a bunch. But think about the effect that those are supposed to have, where you're easily making the information dissemination on behalf of your employees much more efficient. And that's huge. And it just helps span and create more reach. But at the same time, just to pump out content and social posting for the sake of pumping out social posting, doesn't drive trust. That doesn't create engagement. That doesn't create empathy. The things that are going to create empathy is how you engage with those that are engaging with you, or how you can go about creating opportunities to give advice, ideas, help, etc., rather than just speaking to, the screen that you're typing in front of you. It's better to give than receive, is what we were always taught as kids. And that's something that still holds true today when it comes to marketing and building trust on behalf of your brand.
Yeah, and I think that's useful as a business. That's useful as an individual. I mean, they always tell you, even just like, how do you move up in business? Like you have to start doing more than, you have to work outside of your role before you can be promoted to the next role, because you're basically showing proof that you can get to that point. I think that's the same thing here. Like you have to provide value before you can receive the reward.
Right. So let's segue that then into another pillar of digital is content. We're talking about social content in the context of what we were just speaking about, but on the content perspective from a visual design as well as website content perspective, things that need to be addressed to create trust up front is providing content that answers questions proactively rather than creating more, right? FAQs, common objections that are part of your ICP, answering them proactively, both on your website, through your outreach, and ultimately your sales collateral, obviously, and having clear positioning and transparency around who you are, what you do, why you do it best, links to your G2, Capterra profiles, if you have those set up, right? Get those third-party resources and opportunities in front of the individual. Don't make them hunt for it. Make them easily accessible. And then obviously pricing, if you can share that, right? Not every brand can share pricing up front. Look, there's plenty of brands out there that have to sell a custom solution. Not everything's cookie cutter. We do the same thing. Like we don't provide some packages out up front transparently, because it all depends on the situation. What are you trying to achieve as a brand? What are the types of capabilities and services that you need from us to be able to reach those goals? I'm not going to throw a number in front of you, because it's going to be dependent on what you're trying to achieve, your budget, and so many other factors. So I don't think we can say that every brand has to have transparent pricing, because it's just untrue.
Well, this is where the goal of your content, specifically the content on your website, but the content you distribute too, is to turn sales team. If you have the goal of turning your sales team into an order taker because you've answered all of the questions up front, you are going to be far more successful. But you also need to be honest with yourself as far as what those common objections are, where do you fall short, and build that in. Because if you're not honest with yourself and you're just kind of like hiding the things that you're not good at, you're hiding the integrations that you don't have, so you don't put integrations on your thing, you're just, then again, you're wasting like your sales team's time. Like I can't tell you how many reporting tools out there like don't integrate with LinkedIn. Okay, that's great. This looks awesome that you can do all this stuff with Facebook and Google and whatever, but you don't do LinkedIn. We work with 90% B2B clients and 90% of our spend's on LinkedIn. I don't say that's not true, but most of our spend is on LinkedIn. Okay, like they're not going to work for us. I never would have reached out if I knew this ahead of time.
I hate that term, making sales order takers, just so you know. Like you said it, you guys said it once and I was like, okay, I get it. And now every time you say it, I'm like, I just hate it. Because at the end of the day, like an order taker, you're just there to like checking a box and things like that. Like I get the concept and the kind of analogy there, but in reality, like you, meaning we in marketing or in any type of marketing, our job, what we want to do is just make sales easier. It doesn't mean just taking an order. It means making the conversation that sales has with the prospective customer easier because they have so much information up front. And really, you're just answering the questions and creating a relationship between sales and buyer that facilitates the purchase to happen, right? There's going to be instances where you're absolutely like, here's your invoice. Yeah, here's your order.
I think we could think of a better term. Facilitator, maybe. I don't know. But the point is that if your goal is to make the salesperson's job so easy that they almost have to do nothing, let's put it that way. Meaning that they don't have to put together custom pricing. They don't have to send you the integration checklist. They don't have to send you their 6 sales decks because you already know all of that information going in. At that point, it's just about, okay, can you get me access to the product so I can go through and poke around myself? I have access to all of your training resources already, so I can just look at those. I'll let you know if I have any questions. Right. That's like that's the level of conversation you want it to get to. Now, not every product is that. It's not going to be that way. So there's always going to be a purpose of sales. But if you make that your goal, then it is going to be much easier than it is today.
I think the important thing is that we do not want to diminish or degrade the role of sales in the purchase process because they certainly have a very specific role and a very important role as far as that facilitator, enabler of purchase, whatever you want to call it, right? And throw some term on top of it that's buzzy. Like they exist as a salesperson to help that customer or buyer, I should say, become a customer. But you brought up a good point. Like, show me the product. We talk about another thing that exists out there as far as transparency and hiding things. Like, show me the product. Show me screenshots. If you can't even show me like an actual demo, show me a video. Create an on-demand demo. Don't gate it. Like, just give me the link so I can see it myself. Or here's an idea. If it is something that exists as a SaaS product, give me a trial license to give it a spin for 3 days. What's it going to cost you? It's not going to cost you anything. It's going to cost me my time to see if it actually works or not. It's not going to cost sales anything as far as their time is concerned. In reality, you're saving time by giving somebody the keys to the car to figure out if it's going to work on their behalf or not. But the problem is brands are scared that people are going to not be intuitive enough or understand the complexity of their product, regardless of how simplistic it may be, to see whether it's truly able to resolve their challenges or not. That's why sales demos exist, is because brands, and the sales to an extent, but I think it's more so the brand side of things, believe that their buyers are dumb. And you talk about creating mistrust up front, like that's creating some mistrust when you give that kind of interpretation as to why you're not giving keys to the car. And instead you are having to rely on a salesperson doing a demo that's over Zoom or something like that. Like, don't think your buyers are dumb. Give them the opportunity to, be smart on their own, because chances are they're probably more smart than you think.
Yeah. The only thing that I would say to that is, though, the number one reason why SaaS products don't go through is because of the learning curve, like the resistance to change. And this is where we talk about, like, from a content perspective, giving people access to all of the learning materials and making sure that you have learning materials. So I think that there are, like, if you are just going to give trials, I'll say trials, because demos I feel like you can voice over, and I think there's a lot of like education that can go into that. But if you're just going to like hand out a trial, you need to have the educational material to go with it, because yeah, people can poke around and figure stuff out. And sometimes it's probably a lot better to have them poke around and figure stuff out and then have a conversation. But remember, like with this product, it's, you're trying to make a change across the organization. There's going to be multiple people using it, and that they're going to have to be trained on it by probably whoever you're talking to on the sales call. So there's a lot more depth to it than just getting the one person to buy into it. And I think that that's a big thing that you just have to be able to work through and make sure that those resources are available.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, we have clients where I would love if they could do, free trials and things like that for some of what they're selling. But at the end of the day, I know it's near impossible because the complexity, the learning curves, and the integrations that are possibly required across different tech stacks. Like, for example, an AP automation tool. Think about all of the connections that you have to create to actually do a trial of that, depending on how large and complex your infrastructure is. Like, you can't necessarily do that over a trial. There's just no possible way. But I think at the same time, where you can do a trial, think about the purchase process and how you can structure it in a way where you're giving keys to the car, but you're creating a follow-up, after the 3 or 5 days, getting on the calendar and making it clear, like, hey, when you get this trial, one of the things I want on our agenda when we circle back is I'm going to ask you, like, what are 3 things that you had trouble doing in our product? And what are 3 things that you loved about our product? Get that insight up front. Like, you can address the challenges, but you can also double down on the features and things that they love through other sales opportunities, through other sales calls, through your marketing. All of those insights can power the demand gen, the lead gen, whatever, engine you're driving there as a brand. But if you don't ask them, if you don't structure your sales process in that way, you're missing out at the end of the day. And really, to your point, James, if people are struggling to really understand and use that product, and you're not creating that follow-up structure, like, yeah, you're not going to be closing people, because people are just going to say, screw this. Like, I don't get it. I'm moving on. I'm going to find something easier. It may be shittier, but I'm going to find something easier.
Yeah. And that's like, I always, one of the things I always joke about too, is like, enterprise seems to mean complicated. Like, when you have like, oh, here's like the more complicated version, because it is true. Like, enterprise organizations are always the ones that ask for like the exception to the rule piece, and then it gets added to the roadmap and 4 people use it, and then it just takes up clutter in the screen. Yeah. So let's transition here. We talked a lot about content. I mean, content, community. So like, honestly, like, all marketing is content, whether it's ads being the content, what you post on social, what's on your website. So the next piece I want to jump into here is paid media, because this is where, again, I feel like we've kind of beat the head with the gated versus ungated thing, but this is really the basis of where I feel like a lot of mistrust is taking place right now. And I say that because of, the traditional framework of gated top of funnel content to get email addresses that are then going to be essentially cold called by sales. Sales is going to waste their time. They're going to be annoyed. They're going to get a poor customer experience. And then ultimately they're not going to buy your product. So the shift in mentality is around everything that we talked about with so far. It's about being willing to give more than you are, not say more, but give before you receive. So, and a lot of that does fall in gated versus ungated content and nurturing streams that happen after that point. Really, for me at this point, I see really not much value in gated top of funnel content. When I say top of funnel, I mean white papers, case studies, ebooks, because I think that that is all information that should be regularly available. Again, I've made this quote many times, but if you truly believe that your content is that good, that is going to help somebody make a purchasing decision, wouldn't you want more people to see the content rather than less people to see the content? All for what? An email address, which there's so much tech out there right now. Like if you want to get emails of people in your ICP that are cold, like you can buy it, you can get those anywhere. 6 Sense, Zoom Info, like that stuff exists. So there's no point there. Like the goal should shift towards education. Now there's the whole attribution issue, and that's why gated content exists. We're not going to get into that in this podcast. But the shift is being able to give that information up front. Now there still is a valid reason for, I'll call it gated content, but it's around demos, trials, reach out to sales. I mean, really, in my opinion, the content that should be gated is content that you believe is going to directly result in a SQL. That's kind of where I draw the line at this point, which I think if somebody has a trial, a demo, or a like contact sales form, because those people have gotten the content that they need. There's certainly plenty of distribution channels where the content pieces like that are still effective, and it's much more measurable than trying to put these other email addresses through a nurturing stream of email, etc. So it's go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the analogy that I continue to go back to with gated versus ungated is, if you think your content is that good and such an integral part of the sales process, what would you be happier with? Converting at 7% because you gated a piece of content, and therefore leaving 93% of your potential market not reading your content because they just didn't want to fill out the form? Or giving 100% of the market an opportunity to actually read the content? Create more opportunities if this content is such an integral part of your purchase process. Because if you're fixated on gating it still and just wanting 7% conversion rate, then clearly that content actually doesn't matter that much. And it's just part of the marketing plan, marketing strategy, and things like that. Now, the other part of that, though, is I also get why people continue to gate content. And it's because of misalignment and poor management of leadership as it relates to goals, OKRs, KPIs, whatever you want to call it. Mandating that it's not even attribution. It's a mix of attribution. Don't get me wrong, as far as like, hey, show me what this is doing. I need to measure your success and the performance of every single touch point. But I think it's also an outdated mentality and methodology as far as, oh, we need leads to feed sales, or I'm going to measure marketing by the number of MQLs. I'm going to measure sales by the number of one closed open opportunities. Like, it's that complete divergence and argumentative misalignment internally as far as those goals, those KPIs, those OKRs, whatever you want to call it, rather than being aligned around a singular goal: grow the business, close new customers, keep customers happy, lower churn, increase LTV. Like, those, literally, you want to talk about like culture and things like that you should be hanging on a wall. Like, literally just throw those 5 things up in front of the entire office, and like, those are what we're trying to achieve. Like, go do that. I don't care how you do it. Go do it.
Yeah, it's I'm actually very happy because I've been hearing it more and more of like quotes of, again, all over the place as far as where these quotes come from, but we don't care where the revenue came from. We got it. You know, like that's the goal. We had good retention. Those are the two things, like keeping customers and getting new ones. And we all know that the cost of getting a new one is far higher than keeping one. So especially whether now, sales did it, marketing did it.
Especially now, and at any given point, I mean, I think the studies show that anywhere between 5 to 7%, and that's on the high range, of your target market is in the buying process. The rest of them, they're lurkers. They have no interest whatsoever. And you got to convince them to climb that hill of deciding to act on a problem that they haven't acted on yet, or solve it through a shift in partners and vendors and tool sets towards you over whatever they have in place. But the amount of people in market at any given time is infinitesimally, whatever. It's really small.
Well, I think we've dove into quite a bit today. Ultimately, to kind of close this out, building trust needs to be a much larger focus of your marketing strategy, because trust leads to new customer acquisition, customer retention. It really does affect all of those OKRs that you were talking about.
There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things you can do. I think it all starts up front with thinking about, and asking your customers, but also internal stakeholders, what are we doing to build trust, right? And marketing can be at the forefront of that initiative. Hey, we want to build brand awareness. We want to build demand. Well, you know what? We want to build trust. How are we going to go about building trust? We're going to make sure that we're soliciting third-party reviews and making sure our customers have them readily available when asked. We're going to make sure that we have content that's transparent, open, helpful, educational, and not be hiding anything or feel like we're hiding anything. Because at the end of the day, again, like we've said a couple times, it's better to give than receive.
Agreed. Well, thanks everybody. Hopefully we can continue to have you tune in as Andy is joining us moving forward. I think a great addition to this podcast. So please like, subscribe, follow Andy on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn if you don't already. And we will see you next week.
See you.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday.